Um, Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Special thanks to Irit and Marty for joining us, and I think being so generous with their time and wisdom, hopefully, that we'll all take away a lot of great lessons here. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Julio Vasconcelos. I'm the founding managing partner of Atlantico. We're an early stage venture fund investing in Latin America. And I'll be the moderator here today, basically handing things off to Irit, who's going to be running this fireside chat with Marty Cagan. And then at the end, we'll leave probably 20, 30 minutes for questions. So there's a Q&A that's open here, and you can submit your questions there. I've also shared all the questions that everyone's shared in the sign-up form with Irit as well. So she'll try to moderate from those as well. And if I can ask everyone here that joined for one little favor, I think at the end here, we're going to share a little bit of a survey just on founder sentiment of what's going on today. And I would appreciate if you guys could take 3 or 4 minutes to fill that out and give us a little bit of feedback. We would certainly appreciate it. But without further ado, I want to hand things off to Irit Epelbaum. For those of you that don't know, Irit is actually an operating partner here at Atlantico, and she's probably one of the most experienced product leaders down here in Latin America. She's been, working in product management and leading product teams now for about 15 years or so. So we're very fortunate to have her. About half of her experience has been in the Silicon Valley Bay Area and half down here. So I think there's sort of this rare combination of having seen things in the US, but also understanding, I think, our local reality here in Brazil and Latin America. And I know she's a huge fan of all the work that Marty Cagan and his team have done, and all his writing and all his workshops and approach over the years. So when she told me that he was coming here later in the year, and I kind of pitched her on doing this sort of preview of a conversation, she agreed to it, and we're very excited to have Marty here. Just a little bit sort of more background here on Irit. I think she started her career in product working at Trulia in the US, big real estate prop tech company. Then worked with me at Pace Urbano almost 15 years ago as our VP of product, went on to be the VP of product at Viva Real, Zappi. And then moved back to the US, where she was one of the founding team members and head of product for Solve Health, which was a company that was backed by Benchmark at the time. I was working at Benchmark as an EIR, so also was able to be pretty close to there. And now she dedicates her time and attention to being a product advisor and a coach. So I'll let her take over from here and introduce Marty. But thank you both for coming.
Thank you, Julio. Hello, everybody, and welcome. We're hosting this chat in English since we have a diverse audience from all across LATAM. It's truly my honor to have the opportunity to have Marty here today and to chat with us. I think it's a significant milestone for the region. As Julio did a little spoiler, he'll be coming here soon, and we'll talk a lot about that in regards to his new book and workshop, Transformed. I think everybody here knows Marty, and we were pretty oversubscribed, so he's a legend. And for a good reason. He's usually called the Godfather of Product. He's the esteemed author of the book Inspired, which is often referred to as the Bible of Product. I know I've given it to almost every product manager I've worked with or hired. He's launched the sequel, Empowered, for product leaders, and soon his new book, Transformed, coming out this year with the workshop. And we'll talk a lot about that today. Marty is also the founder of the Silicon Valley Product Group, through which he has been teaching, coaching, and advising, and publishing some of the best product management content for the past 20 years. I believe I speak not just for myself, for the entire product community in LATAM and in the world, that Marty has set the gold standard for what it means to follow a product model, implement it, and empower a product development team. Prior to SVPG, Marty was a VP of product at Netscape and then a senior VP at eBay. So he has a lot of experience, and I'm honored and humbled to talk with him today. I remember reading the Inspired book 1 year into my product management career, And I have the original copy. It's actually back here in Julio's office now. And I kept thinking, like, this is it. He's defining what it means. He's setting the bar high, and he's giving us a blueprint for how great products are built and how great teams are built. So thank you for joining us today, Marty.
Thanks very much, Irit. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks to everybody for joining.
Cool. So let's get started. So I think to level set, a lot of people here are founders and CEOs, and a lot of them may not fully appreciate or understand what does a good product development team look like. So can you describe what you think it means and what it means to you?
Yeah, but that's a big topic for sure. We could talk for multiple days on that. Maybe I will say one of the things that's important is I don't think it looks just one way. There are many good approaches to product. A lot of people think there's only one way, and of course it's never that case. There's many ways. There's also even bigger number of terrible ways. When we judge whether something is a good way or a bad way, it's all based on outcomes. If a team can consistently solve hard problems, and when we say solve hard problems, it means really solve it in a way that the customers really love. In other words, they buy it, they choose to buy it or choose to use it, and they can figure out how to use it. And also at the same time, that solution solves for the business. It's something that we can sell, we can market, we can service. It's something we can afford to build. It's something we can monetize effectively. It's something that's legal if that's relevant. It's compliant with regulations. That's pretty hard. So you're trying to solve for the customer, you're trying to solve for the business, and you're trying to solve for the technology. Even if on top of everything else this year, we have generative AI, which is yet another disruptive enabling technology. For product people, this is like what we live for, because disruptive technologies allow us to solve problems we've always wanted to solve, but never really had a good way to solve. So in that sense, it's actually a really great time. It's also, whenever a disruptive technology comes along, some companies go out of business and other ones become much bigger. So it's a very, and usually those are the ones that either understood how to apply new technology versus the ones that don't. So, what's a good product? What's a good product culture? It's one that can successfully take advantage of opportunities and successfully respond to serious threats. And we measure that by business results. We don't measure it by how many features we ship or how many redesigns we do. That's called output. What we measure it by is results. Results. Do people buy and love your product as your company grow? Do people continue to renew? Every company's kind of has its own right definition of what the results that they're targeting are. But that's what good product teams do. And there are lots of different ways to do that. There are some best practices that you find in the best companies. And really the reason I started SVPG was I had been working with several of the best companies in the world, which was really just by luck where I was when I was doing this. I was in this good position, and I started to realize pretty quickly that in a lot of the world, they don't work this way at all. And they really almost never innovate. And so I was very interested in, well, why aren't they working the way these other companies are working? So I spend a lot of my time sharing what I see the best companies do. Today, we kind of call that the product operating model, which is really a set of principles on how good teams operate. But they're just principles. There's a lot of different ways of doing it. I just literally last night got an email from somebody with a question, which was because they were confused because they learned how Apple worked. And they said, oh my gosh, Apple's so different than Google, so different than Amazon, so different than Netflix. And I was like, well, not really. If you look at the principles, they're following the exact same things. There are very different cultures in those companies. And they build very different kinds of products, like building a device like a phone or a watch is a pretty different thing than building, say, a movie service or a music service like Spotify. So there's some differences for sure, but the principles are remarkably consistent. And so my focus is on those principles.
Great. And I'm sure we'll get into more of those and what they mean today. So you talk a lot about how product, basically the team comes up with the solutions. So as a coach, I find there's a lot of questions on, who's responsible for what, who's responsible for the product vision, the strategy, coming up with the solution. I know that you have a great way of talking about this, and so I wanted to share it with this group.
Sure. And the first thing I should say too, because this audience is probably a mix of early stage founders kind of people and larger companies that are based in Latin America. So there's some differences there. Partly, if you try to talk about what's the optimal setup for innovation, it's pretty much a startup. Startups are machines searching for product market fit. And they only succeed if they get to product market fit. But then when you grow, there's a lot of other challenges to scale up and to become a machine for creating new startups within your company. Amazon is probably the best in the world at spinning up new startups within Amazon. But so this matters. And I say that because in a startup, the product people are usually one of the founders. In fact, and I don't want to speak for Atlantico, but most of the investors that I know, they won't invest in a company if one of the co-founders is not an experienced product person, because they know this is going to be the case. One of the co-founders is got to be a product person. They are the product manager. They are the product leader. And I encourage that. And we want to encourage that to stay that way for as long as you can, actually, which, depending on the company, maybe anywhere from about 20 engineers to 100 engineers, but something like that, at which point the CEO will often come to me, or the co-founder that's the head of product, and say, I don't know what to do. I can't run the company and run the product at the same time. And so we'll often have a talk about, well, what do they really want to do? Because they can continue to run the product even as CEO. And there are several great companies that were run that way. I mean, I actually don't like Meta or Facebook because of their choices, but Zuckerberg is very good at product. And when I first met him, he was in that situation. That's why he hired Sheryl Sandberg to run the company while he ran the product. So you can continue to do this for quite a while, but that's, in terms of who's responsible for product, that's a big one in startups. It's usually one of the co-founders, and in fact, it's a problem to hire product managers too soon in that situation, because you get too many cooks in the kitchen. But once a company gets into scale up and you start growing and you have some number of different product teams, there's just not enough hours in a day. And so it's very common for one of the founders to either formally become the head of product or hire a head of product, and they'll usually build out a team of product managers. But you had asked kind of about how teams make decisions in general, and the way we like to talk about that is product is all about risk. There's 4 big risks with everything we build. Sometimes it's a minor risk, sometimes it's a very big risk, but we have risks. So, for example, the first risk is value risk. Value risk is the most important, really, because if people don't buy it, none of the other things matter, right? And also, by the way, that's what most companies get wrong, is value risk. They don't actually address that. And they don't understand really why their product doesn't sell. They think it's because the market's not big enough. They think it's because the price is wrong, or all these other things that are really, no, the problem is people don't really want this solution. That's what's really going on. Or it's not better than the alternatives. That's very, very common. And it's the product manager or the co-founder in the startup that's responsible for that value risk. Similarly, there is a usability risk, which is, can people figure out how to work this? Now, for most consumer products, we sort of are forced to keep it simple enough that that's not a problem. So we are forced to do things like good product design, but in a lot of B2B software, that is a huge problem because these are complicated workflows that people are doing in order to set up payroll or to set up invoicing or whatever they're doing. And so a product designer is responsible for usability risk. Can the people figure out how to work this product without requiring training classes and videos and stuff to learn? The third risk is a technology feasibility risk. Can we actually build it with the skills we have, with the tech stack we have, with the time we have? That's a big question. And with things like generative AI, that risk is moved to the front. That is a big one again. It always comes back. It never goes away. It's just sometimes after a while, the engineers say, we've built things like this 100 times. You don't have to worry about this risk. We know how to build it. But right now, that is a big risk. And a lot of teams are testing out things like ChatGPT and the APIs to see, can they really build this or not? Or what does it mean to build this? And the final risk, which is actually another very large one, is viability risk. This refers to, value risk refers to whether your customers will succeed with this. Viability risk refers to whether your company can make this work. And that's where the sales and the marketing and the financing and the monetization, all that comes in. And that is also a responsibility of the product manager or startup founder. So the founder, product manager person is responsible for the value and the viability of the solution, the designer, the usability, and the engineers, the feasibility. And together, they work on a product. Sometimes we're working on things that are really complex, like autonomous driving, risky everywhere. Sometimes we're working on things that are pretty easy, like an invoicing system. I mean, nothing is really easy when you drill down, but comparatively, it's a lot easier.
Yeah, and you touched on a great point, which is basically the responsibility of product manager in understanding some of these risks. And I think one of the things I kind of see the most when coaching companies in Brazil and Latam is this confusion about the role of the product manager, and mostly because some agile methodologies and perhaps the misuse of them have warped this idea. So they asked me, should we hire a product manager, a product owner, a project manager? You know, what's the difference between all of these? And I also know you have like a great way of framing this and explaining this. And so I wanted to share it with this group.
Yeah, well, this is another really complicated one, because the truth is there are several different definitions of what a product manager is. I just shared with you the sort of the classic Silicon Valley definition, which is a product manager of an empowered product team. What that means is a team is given a problem to solve and they are empowered, they are enabled to go figure out the best solution. Sadly, and surprisingly to me, most of the world doesn't work like that. They don't work like that. They have what's either called feature teams or even worse, delivery teams. And one of the this is not so much of a problem in the US. It is a problem, but it's sort of a second tier problem. But in Latin America and especially in Europe, this is a big problem. People confuse product teams with a process, and in particular, a delivery process. A product owner is not a job. A product owner is a role on an agile team. And that is, if you get somebody who thinks they're a product owner and they're trained by an agile coach that has never done a product job, they just know the role in Scrum of what the product owner is supposed to do, you are setting up a recipe for failure. And that, unfortunately, is a problem in so much of the world. And, you know, one of the big curiosities to a lot of us in the tech, the sort of traditional tech industry is, why in the world are people doing this? And I think it's cultural. I do think there's a part of a culture there where companies in certain parts of the world think the answer is process. And I will say, and part of this is maybe, don't get me wrong, US, North American culture has a lot of problems. I mean, burnout, all kinds of overwork, there's all kinds of issues. But one of the things that I think works to our advantage is that we are very suspicious of process, very nervous about process. We know process can hurt you much easier than it can help you. And in fact, there's from as far away ago as the mid-90s, Steve Jobs were talking about the disease of process people. And so we're more scared of formal process than a lot of the rest of the world. And I have been trying to get the rest of the world to be scared of process. I think they fall into this trap. Anytime you get a company where they're literally calling their product people product owners, that's a pretty big sign that they are very confused. And again, what am I judging this on? Results. You almost never see any real innovation in this model. In fact, we call it the mercenary model, not the missionary model. We want teams that really care about what they're doing to come up with great solutions. By the way, solutions that rarely the customers even thought was possible. Rarely the executives in your company even thought were possible.
And I think this is a good segue into your new book, Transformed, and about basically implementing the product model and moving away from a feature or delivery team to an empowered team. So I want to just start off asking you about, who are the teams and companies you think benefit the most from this? And if you can explain a bit more in your own words about what this transformation means.
Sure. And actually, just literally a few days ago, I finished the full content for this new book. So I'm finally kind of get it all together and stuff. But I will tell you, so I wrote Inspire just to share the techniques of the best product teams. So I was seeing those teams and lots of people had questions. So I just shared the techniques. That's what it is, Inspired. How do good product teams work? Product managers, designers, engineers, how do they solve hard problems together? Then I started getting questions from people saying that the teams wanted to work that way, but the leaders didn't know how to work that way. And so I realized, well, we have to share the techniques of the best product leaders as well. And so that's what drove Empowered. But then literally, and this has been, Empowered's been out, it came out during the pandemic, so it's been out for about 2 years now. And the most common question that we get by far, and this comes from all over the world. I mean, that's why I'm planning to go back to Brazil. It comes from India, it comes from China, it comes from all over Europe. And they say, look, we want to work this way. Our people want to work this way, but we don't work, our company works nothing like this today. And so we have a different problem. We have a change management problem. How do we move from this old way of working? We know it's old. We know it's not innovative. We know engineering investment gets very little return. We know that. But we have a hard time changing. So how can we transform to the product model? That question was coming so much that we realized that we needed to answer that question, because that's really what, I mean, now I'm talking about SVPG, but my partners and I, what we've really been doing the last 20 years is helping companies that want to get better at product. And they would call up and we would do that. Now, some of those companies were already using the product model and they're just trying to get a little better. But other ones were like, they were banks, or they were, insurance companies or manufacturing companies, car companies. And they were, we're not doing anything like this. We have very different models here, and we know it's not working. So the book Transformed was written to help a company that is working in an old way that wants to move to the new way. And that's a change problem. That's why it's called Transformed, and it's about moving to the product model. So and I would argue it's a lot easier for a company that was born in the product model. The new ones that start up, like Stripe is a great example. You know of Stripe probably. They are very successful, but they were born in this model. They are probably one of the best examples of companies using the product model. And but most companies were not born in it. They were born a lot of times way before. A lot of them are old. I worked with one company that literally celebrated its 200th birthday. They're a publishing company called The Guardian in the UK. So they were long before any of this stuff. And so they had to change really from the very top down. Anyway, that's what the new book is trying to address, is how do you change your organization?
That's great. And, I think here in Brazil and LATAM, that there's a lot of companies that probably kind of fit in that mold of wanting to change. And I keep thinking, does leadership always know in those companies that they need to go through a transformation? Is there are there some telltale signs? I mean, you talked about lack of results, but those can sometimes be, I don't know, talked about in other ways of well, this is not happening because the market's changing or whatever. But is there a checklist, a test, something that leadership that the leadership can look at and say hey, we really need to make this change?
Well, so there's two parts to that. The first part is what motivates them to change at all. And then the other is, well, how far are we? What do we need to do? So the second one is easier. We have an assessment, which is included in the book. We just shared our own assessment so that you can do that yourself and decide how close you are. Here's all the principles, here's all the competencies. If you can do this now, great. If you can't, you have some work to do. The first part, though, is the harder question. So what motivates a company to want to transform? So there's two big things and then a bunch of things we call nudges. The two big things are threat. Number one, threat, a competitive threat. And you know what usually causes that? A company like Amazon coming after your customers. So you have a company that's been in place for a long time. Oh, I just met, here's a good example, and this is very relevant to Brazil. You've got a company like Stripe doing financial services, but you also have a bunch of existing companies like banks in Brazil that have been doing wonderful for many years, thinking they don't have to worry about competitors, all of a sudden going, oh my God, we do have to worry about competitors. There are new approaches to these kinds of banking services that our customers are moving to, and sometimes moving very quickly away to these. And so that puts fear into the leaders. It usually comes from the board of directors, from the executive team. They get scared and they realize that they have to change if they want to survive. I would say that's the most common reason. Now, the sad part about that is usually by the time a company like Stripe or Amazon is coming after you, it may be too late, because it takes years to build these skills. And if you wait until they're already attacking and going after your customers, it might be too late. I know too many examples where it was too late. The second reason, big reason, is because these CEOs, they're smart people. Almost all of them are smart people. They watch the stock market. They can see how the stock market rewards companies that are really good at the product model. Look at the valuations of Amazon. Look at the valuations of Stripe, of Google, of Apple. I mean, they have massive valuations. And many times these leaders are like, look, we could probably be valued at 10 times what we are if we could convince the world we can innovate also. And so that it's, instead of fear, it's more like envy. They envy those other companies. Those are probably the two biggest reasons. And of course, generative AI is just accelerating this, because now even companies that considered themselves safe are now not. Even look at Google with search. It's the first time that, which is an amazingly good product with dominance, for the first time in 20 years is under threat. Now, they knew this was a possibility, so they started investing in these before. But even Google search, it's probably the most successful financially, I mean, $100 billion in accumulated revenue from this thing. So it's pretty amazing. But even they are feeling it. So that happens to everybody, potentially. And so the disruptive technologies put that at risk. Another thing that happens sometimes is, you know, the industry goes through these ups and downs where you can find lots of good engineers, and then I can't find any good engineers. It goes up and down. And if your engineers decide they don't want to work for your company because they're tired of working in these ridiculous processes, which just treats them as a, you know, an order taker, they're not able to use their brains. In a lot of companies, the engineers say, like, look, either you move to the product model or we're moving to a company that follows the product model. And that applies to designers and product people. So sometimes that's the nudge. It's usually never the driver because the leaders are so far up, they feel like they can just hire Accenture and outsource the stuff. So that's a possibility, but these are the things that usually motivate a company to decide they need to get serious.
Cool, thank you. And I think in this, when they're finally deciding, like, yeah, we're going to do this, what do you think are the first steps that leadership needs to take?
Well, fundamentally, they need, you know, there's a bit of a catch-22 because they know they need to change, but most of the time their leaders have never worked that way before. So they're like, I know I'm a leader of the company, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So they kind of have this situation where they know they need to change, but they don't know how to change. Now, in that model, there's really two things you see companies do. One is they go out and hire people. They hire an experienced head of product. They hire an experienced head of technology that have worked in the product model, and they show the company how to do this. And by the way, that's what we usually recommend because that's pretty much the surest thing, the safest. The other option, though, and this is about half the time companies do, sometimes more, depending on whether they have access to good people that know this stuff, is they bring in a product coach. They bring in a product coach. You're an example of a product coach. One of my longtime friends, Joka Torres, who's actually I can see on the call, he's a product coach. And they bring in these coaches to say, show us how to do this. What I will say, just because I realize this is a sensitive topic, a lot of existing bigger companies, startups don't do this, mostly because they can't afford to do this, but that's actually a good thing in this case. But larger companies, what they usually do is they hire a management consultancy. They hire McKinsey, or they hire Bain, or they hire one of the big 4 consultancies, and they say, come in and do this for us. I've never seen this work. And I think fundamentally what's going on, well, partly, most of the time, they've never worked in the product model either. So they have no idea. But of course, they have relationships with the CEO, and the company. The CEO will spend millions of dollars before they realize this is not working. But another problem is it doesn't work to sort of outsource this. You have to build these skills. And that's not what management consultancies are about. They're not about you building the skills. They're about you hiring them to do this for you. So I never recommend that. I recommend coaches which are there not to do it for you, but to teach your people how to work this way.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I found that for transformations, you know, at least working as a product coach or even starting them internally, one of the things that works the best is probably, you know, in a big organization, selecting a smaller team or squad to work that way, and then to show positive results, which inspire the rest of the org to kind of adopt the model. Would you agree with that? Have you seen other strategies in terms of, you know, that have worked in terms of implementing transformation?
So, yeah, this is now, we're really getting into the meat of transformation. And there are lots of techniques. You just listed a very proven, solid technique, which is called pilot teams. pilot teams are there to try out new ways of working so that they can learn how to do it, but the rest of the organization is able to watch and learn from them without risking things. So that's one. There are many, though, many different techniques, and depends on the circumstances what you'd recommend. Maybe it's worth highlighting, because we haven't really talked about this yet, because we really haven't talked about what is the product model. But the way we usually describe it is it really means three things. It means changing how you build, it means changing how you solve problems, and it means changing how you decide which problems you're going to solve. So changing how you build is the original reason companies went to Agile. And I mean real Agile, where they would release every week or two. Unfortunately, Agile has been taken over by a lot of these process people, and a lot of times they don't even release every week. So, and I tell them, you're spending all this money, you're not Agile, you're not getting the benefits, you're wasting all this. That's a waste of time. But if you're doing real Agile, not what's called fake Agile, then great, that's to change how you build. And we do that to take care of our customers. We just can't take care of our customers if we're releasing monthly or worse, quarterly. So that's the first. The second is changing how you solve problems, which is really about moving from implementing features on a roadmap to discovering solutions that are valuable, usable, feasible, and viable. What I was alluding to earlier, that's called product discovery. And the first one is referred to as continuous delivery, and product discovery is usually referred to as continuous discovery. And then the third one, how do you decide which problems to solve? My guess is every company on this call has some sort of quarterly or annual process where they always get together and they fight it out to try to decide what initiatives they're going to fund. And, they usually do a little bit for this executive and a little for that one, and a little for that one. It's just this whole ridiculous process that's used. But good product companies don't work that way. They don't work that way. They are much more rigorous about how they decide which opportunities to pursue and which threats to take seriously. This is actually what product leaders are hired to do. So they do a product vision, they do a product strategy, and that turns into the problems to solve for the teams. So those are the three elements, or the three dimensions of the product model. Now, the reason I just thought to mention that is because another way that we often recommend a company move to the product model is they assess each of those three. So it's not unusual, for example, to find that a company's doing pretty good on the first one. And so it's not too hard for them to get their building under control, but they're usually doing nothing on the second and worse than nothing on the third. So you can also divide up this transformation work by these three dimensions. And that works out pretty well also. But there are many other techniques too. The book will list about a dozen techniques that are well-known transformation techniques. And the idea is, as a coach, you would recommend whatever you think is right for their situation.
Right. And I know along with the book, you're basically hosting and doing a bunch of transformation workshops. And I'm sure that in those you kind of get deep into the meat of all of this. I wanted to tell this group, some of them I've already spilled the beans with, that you're basically going to do the transformation workshop in Brazil in October. And so I wanted for you to tell us a little bit more about the workshop. So companies you know about it and hopefully can join.
Yeah, well, we planned 4 this year, 4 of them. The first one, London, New York, Stockholm, and Rio. So we planned 4. We haven't announced the Rio one yet. That'll be announced in the next week or two. But you've said it, I've said it to others, so it's fine. But the other 3 sold out almost immediately, which was a test. We didn't know. we didn't know how many companies are serious about moving to the product model, or at least serious about learning what the product model even is. So, and the good news was they all sold out right away. And so that gives me a lot of confidence. I believe that will be the case in Latin America as well, because I've been down to Brazil, except for the pandemic, every year for about 15 years. And so I met a lot of companies, and I think that, there's just as much interest, I think, in Brazil as in Europe. So we'll see, though. But that's the idea. There'll be, and in, the workshop, the idea is to talk about the concepts, and then, unlike a book, we can actually work on them. We could talk about, let's do an assessment. Let's talk about the techniques that would actually make the most sense for your company. And we can do that in breakout groups. And so that's the idea of a workshop. We'll do one day, which is just on transformation. And then optionally, people can stay for the second and third days, which are where we actually talk about how to do these things like product vision, and how to do things like product strategy, and how to do product discovery. Because a lot of them, the transformation work will tell them the skills they need to build, but they don't know those skills yet.
Right. No, it's super exciting. And I want to be mindful of time. I know we have an audience eager to ask a lot of questions. So we'll go to the first one with Marcelo Quintela, and Julio will, I guess, put Marcelo on. I may have done that transition a bit too quick.
Hey guys, hi Marty.
Hi, Marcelo.
Hi. So I'm Marcelo Quintela. I've been in tech for 25 years as a PM for the past 15 years or so. I'm currently as a co-founder in a very early stage company, still looking for product market fit, but I've been in bigger companies before. With the whole theme of transformation, which it has a lot to do with cultural change and everything. If you were called to be on a board of a public company that is in deep need of transformation, and you get there and realize that it's in deep need of transformation, I imagine it's going to be in a book, but how do you even start? And in particular, how do you work with the CEO? Do you always need to change the CEO? Can the CEO be transformed in the process? How do you even start that process?
Sure. Well, as you might imagine, it's a pretty big question. But so first of all, sometimes, in fact, more often than not, it is the CEO that calls us, because the CEO has already realized they need to change, but now is looking for some help, some like, where do I start kind of question. In other companies, the board has decided that the CEO does not understand this. And so the board has replaced the CEO, and then it starts. But I will tell you, I'm glad you asked this question, because this has not come up in our chat yet. But one of the things we've learned in the last 20 years, the CEO has a very big role to play in this. And we haven't talked about that, right? We've been talking about the product organization. We've been talking about product leaders, product managers, designers, engineers. Turns out the CEO has a very big role to play, because it is true that most of the changes, most of the work is inside product and design and engineering. However, all of the work we're talking about has to be done with the rest of the business. And what happens is, if the CEO just treats this as an IT problem, in other words, if they just go to the CIO and say, you do this, doesn't work. Because very soon, the head of, the product teams need to work with finance differently. They need to work with HR differently. They need to work with marketing differently, with sales differently. And very soon, those people, they try to decide, is this important or is this noise? And if the CEO is not there to tell them this is important, it doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. It's one of the biggest reasons for transformation failures. So the CEO doesn't have to be an expert in this stuff, but they need to step up and show leadership in certain cases. It always happens. It usually happens, a few months in, and then now these interactions are starting. Okay, so that's important. More broadly, though, you asked, what would I do? And I've been in that situation where one of the board members calls me up and says, in fact, that's what happened at The Guardian. They brought in a new chairman of the board, a wonderful woman who was an executive at Microsoft and at Apple. And they made her the head of the board, and she knew immediately a transformation was necessary. And they were able to use the existing CEO in that case, but they had to bring in some people and some coaching. And it starts with an assessment. Because you have to figure out what skills the company already has and what don't they have. Most of the time, they have people called product managers or product owners. The problem is they're not doing the job, nowhere close to the job. So this is difficult because you're going in and you're saying, look, unless you can dramatically raise the bar on these people, product model won't work. And it won't work because the stakeholders, the vice presidents all around the company, they won't trust these people. And frankly, they usually shouldn't. A typical product owner that knows nothing about what we've been talking about, they shouldn't be trusted. So yeah, that's just one of many things that has to happen. But it really starts with that assessment. And the assessment is looking at really, or at least the way we do an assessment, you can do it any number of ways, but the way we do it is we look at how you build today and contrast that where how you need to be building. We look at how you solve problems, and we look at how you decide which problems to solve, those three big dimensions. And we just, it's not hard. You talk to people at every level, and pretty soon you have a good understanding of what they do and what they don't do. And so then we can talk about, all right, to really work in the product model, you need to get from here to here. And you can have that discussion for each of those three dimensions. And then you can get to work on the actual principles.
Thanks, Marty. Next one up is Bernardo. It's actually his birthday today. So happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
And thank you for joining us today.
You're muted. There we go. Hi, Bernardo.
Hi, Mike. Sorry. Thanks, Irit, and thanks for the happy birthday. I'm a huge fan, and I've read all your books and love them, of course, pun intended, right? And I just I'm currently the CTO of IntelliPulse, which is a leader in logistics software in Brazil. And I'd like to know, is it possible to move from an IT mindset company to a product-oriented company without people that have already experienced that journey? And if so, can you give your top 3 tips on how to start the process?
Well, this is what I was trying to refer to earlier when Irit asked the question about, what do you do if you don't? It's like you said, you want to change, but you don't have people that have done it. And I was saying that there were really 2 things you could do in that case. One is you can hire some people that have done it, bring them in, or you can bring in a product coach that has done it and helped other companies. And those are the 2 approaches that I know, really, that kind of the only 2 really viable approaches. But you do need to typically do one or the other, because these are not my, I spend a lot of my time writing about these problems, but I will be the first to admit reading the books alone won't do it. There's a lot more nuance that comes from all the years of experience with product teams. So yeah, that's where you would get a coach, and they would help you with those changes. They would help you know what you need to do. Maybe it's worth me saying, and I just want to be very clear. I've already mentioned 2 product coaches, Irit and Joka Torres. SVPG, we don't have any financial relationship with any coaches. We don't want to. We have a set of coaches that we think are very good, and we want to be able to recommend them to companies, and we want them to trust that if we say they're good, that they know they're good. We don't want them to think it's because we have any kind of financial ties. But that's what good product coaches do. And to your question, and I guess I am sort of plugging the book here, but in the book, I have more case studies of companies like you described, Bernardo, that have transformed from the IT mindset to the product model than anything else we've ever written. And I have two kinds of case studies. One is the transformations themselves, how they made the changes. But then I also have, and I think is the even more fun, which is, okay, so we didn't say this explicitly, but really important question is, how do you know a transformation has succeeded? How do you know you've arrived? Our answer to that is because now the company could do things they've never been able to do before. Now they can actually innovate consistently. Now they can actually solve problems, hard problems, in ways customers love but work for the business. Now they can respond to threats. So what I included in this story are examples from companies all over the world, including, by the way, a Brazilian company that Joka Torres was actually helping. Gympass, many of you know Gympass is one of the first unicorns out of Brazil. But you may know that, Gympass, their business was under serious, it was almost destroyed from the pandemic. Almost destroyed. But because they had built these skills, and the answer, how did they build those skills? They hired Joka, and he implemented these skills. Luckily, he got them in place before the pandemic hit. And when the pandemic hit, they pivoted what they did. In just months, they pivoted what they did, and they came out of the pandemic with twice as many customers as going in. Unlike pretty much every other fitness company I know, which when it got in big trouble, gyms got in trouble, obviously. So that's why you do this. That's how you know if it's done well. And yeah, that's how most companies solve this. In the book, I share examples of both situations. Those where they hired leaders that knew how to do it. And then the other is where they brought in a coach that taught their existing leaders how to do this.
Thanks, Marty. We have two more questions from participants. So next one is Juan Ma. Julie, if you can plug him in.
Hey, Marty.
Hey, Juan.
Here. Nice to meet you. I'm Juanma Cortez. I'm the head of product at Cobre. Here at Cobre is a Series A startup. We are working on solving the problem around the money movement in Latin America, from cash in collections to cash out disbursements, only with a focus in the B2B area.
Mm-hmm.
And we're part of Atlantico's portfolio, and we met weekly with Irit. He's our coach, my product coach, and she's also our advisor, and it's really helpful for us anytime that we have this type of conversation. I have a question for you, and I would like to hear your thoughts about this. It's how can you achieve success when you face the challenge of finding great people, high achievers, when you don't have in your team high achievers, or where you are working with limited resources, time, money. In the meantime, you need to provide and deliver results, deliver products. When you are in such scarcity conditions, how are your suggestions or your advice to achieve success with those factors?
Good.
Thanks.
Good. And I want to, by the way, I see what you're describing all over the world. What a lot of people don't realize is you should see how serious that problem is in San Francisco, in New York. And the reason, you know what the startup founders tell me? They say, we can't hire anybody. Netflix hires all of them. Google hires all of them. And if you see what Netflix pays, they're like, we can't pay nearly what Netflix pays. I don't even know how Netflix is able to pay that much. They're crazy. But it's a common problem all over the world. And interestingly, you were saying you want to try to find high achievers. That's not really how it works. People, even great people, they don't know product. Nobody's really born knowing how to do product well. everybody I know, and especially the best people I know, they learned it from someone else. You know, in my first 10 years of my career, I was an engineer for the first 10 years. But every single day for those 10 years, I had at least one person, almost always my manager, who was assigned to help me get better at my job. And don't get me wrong, I already studied computer science in university. I knew the theory, but that is very different from building real products. And so what I was being coached on every day, every week, was how to build good products, how to do this well. And then I wanted to learn design. And so I was coached on design. And then I wanted to learn product management. A completely different person coached me on that. This is how most people learn. They don't get born knowing this. So you can't just, unless you have really unlimited money, and almost nobody does. Maybe the exception there might be Netflix, but even that is going to change eventually. So what we do is we hire people that we believe have the potential and we coach them. This is a manager's job. If you're an engineering manager, your primary job is to coach your engineers. This is really important to get across. The person that actually coached Steve Jobs for the first 10 years of Apple, and the person that coached Jeff Bezos at Apple, at Amazon, and the person that coached Larry and Sergey for the first 10 years at Google, that was the same guy. His name was Bill Campbell. And he argued to each of them that you cannot be a good manager without being a good coach. That is what the job means. So what I often will have to do is sit down with the head of engineering, sit down with the head of product and say, you are not doing what you need to do. You need to be spending your time teaching your people how to be good, how to do their job well. That is your primary responsibility, at least for those of you that manage individual contributors. And if you're a manager of managers, then your main responsibility is to hire managers that know how to do this and make sure they do. But honestly, the real answer all around the world to doing this consistently and at scale is coaching. And I want to be clear, this is not an accident. If you go look online, Apple likes to explain to it, they're public about this. They have something called Apple University, which they send their own managers to. And at Apple University, they say to be a good manager, you need to do 4 things. And one of them is coach your people. If you talk and listen to Satya at Microsoft, who's led quite a turnaround as they've now moved back, ironically, to the product model, they say there's 3 responsibilities of a manager. One of them is coaching. Google says, every year they do surveys they ask their people about what makes good managers. Number 1 attribute of a good manager at Google, they are considered a good coach. Number 2 attribute at Google is they're considered an empowering manager, not a micromanager. So these are not accidents. And obviously, I just gave you names of massive companies because that's how they do this at scale. They know that they can't hire, enough people that are ready to go. They have to develop them. And this is what's encouraging. Most people can be developed. The bigger issue is that in many companies, the managers that are responsible for developing them have never done the job. So that's where we're back to either hiring managers that know how to do the job and can coach others, or hire coaches.
Thanks, Marty. I want to be respectful of your time. I know we're at the end of the hour, but I was wondering if you have time, and feel free to say no for one last question.
Sure, go ahead.
Sure. So our last question is from Tomás at Mercado Libre. And thank you so much for the extra time.
Hello. Hey, Marty. Well, number one, thank you very much, because it's like connecting the dots. I feel that I already know you, but we've never met. And that's probably because I started working on product around like 10, 12 years ago. And on the topic of being a product coach, Irit was my first product coach, and she taught me probably like almost everything I know about it. And you know, it's like the greatest thing I think that she taught me is like being extremely hands-on. It's like sitting next to me and just like, you know, it's like teaching me how to do product by actually doing product herself. And the second thing is that my actual leader today, he's a huge fan of you. So like having, you know, it's like you read, and you know, it's like my leader on the meeting is like really gratifying. So I work as a director of product for Mercado Libre, and today I have the privilege of being a leader of leaders, or a leader of product managers too. And with like 40 product managers, and we have around like 400 product managers throughout the company. It's like a largest marketplace in Latin America. And my question is, we're trying to foster product skills around the team. And of course, you know, so we hire people without experience, and then we hire people with experience, and then of course we try to coach people. And I always wonder how should I balance my time between being super hands-on, dealing with the product with my team, versus giving them feedback and advice on how they manage their products, right? And you know, it's like, it's probably a little bit of art and science, but I really wanted to get your views on, you know, it's like, how should I balance that?
Yeah, well, first of all, hands-on is not a good term, because hands-on could be awesome, you're doing great, all the right things, or it could be awful, you are micromanaging your people. I don't know. From just the term hands-on is not helpful, because this is a really important topic. How involved should the leaders be with the actual teams? Because I would answer, they need to be very involved. Very involved. Like, you should know each of your people very closely. You should know what they're working on. You should know what their problems are. You should know what their career goals are. You should believe every one of your product managers has the potential to be in your job in a few years if they continue to do well. You know, you need to know a lot. You should also know that all the latest data on the marketplace. You should know about any issues. But should you be micromanaging them? Not if you want them to become competent. No, this is not a manufacturing line. This is innovation. So you need to be careful about how you engage with them. And this is why the one-on-one coaching is so important. And I'm referring to you coaching your people there. You need to make sure that you ask questions. You can ask any questions. Those are fine. It's totally fine for you to say things like, well, what are the risks that you're addressing right now? And maybe they say, oh, the big risk here is technology feasibility and value. Like, okay, that makes sense. Tell me how you're addressing those risks. And they might say, well, we don't really know how to address value. And you could say, okay, well, let me share with you 3 different techniques. And then we'll talk about those techniques, and you'll decide which one you think is the most appropriate. And then if I need to teach you that technique, I'm happy to, but you'll try it. That's the kind of back and forth that you're doing, as opposed to saying, okay, this is a hard problem, move over, let me drive. I know how to do this. And that is, I want to be very clear. Most managers that become people managers, most of them, and this unfortunately included me too, most of them, the reason they got promoted was because they were good at their job, right? That's normal. They're promoted because they're quite good at their job. But once you're promoted and now you're responsible for other people, what got you to the job, got you the promotion, is not what will make you succeed. In fact, the most common temptation when a problem occurs is that that person will revert to doing what they did that got them promoted. They will take over. And pretty soon your people feel like, well, that's the way it is here. The manager does all the decisions. and we are just here to do, grunt work. That is not what you want. You want to be teaching them. One of the things we tell all new managers is that now you're a people manager, your product is your people, not your product. The product is your people. So this is really what you're focused on. You do need to know a lot about the product. That's a big part of your job, especially because another part of your job is product strategy, and that's driven off of the insights from the teams. So, you've actually asked a really important question about the nature of good leadership. And I'm not really doing justice to it. I will suggest to you that is a big reason why I wrote the book Empowered. And the biggest section in Empowered is on how to be a good coach for your people. And so I would encourage you to take a fresh look at that and just ask yourself, are you an empowering manager, or are you reverting at times to micromanaging? Hopefully that's useful.
Right. I mean, we're a little over time, but wanted to thank you both for an amazing masterclass. I know I learned a lot. Hopefully everyone else did. Unfortunately, we couldn't get to all the questions, but thank you everyone that submitted questions and was here today. Hope everyone enjoyed it as much as we did. And thank you all, and hopefully see you soon in Rio, Marty. Take care.
Thanks very much for inviting me and for joining us.
Thank you so much for being here, Marty. And, there's a lot of people here on the call that wanted to learn more about launch book dates and the workshop dates. So we'll share it with that group, and really appreciate all of the time today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.